Alright folks, I wanted to do a video talking about the differences between a cheap knife and a value knife. And I've mentioned it in some other videos, and I just want to kind of continue it here. And my perspective, and I'm not always right, and I might not be right about this, is that a cheap knife is something that you don't pay a lot of money for. It's a knife that you buy that is relatively inexpensive. And then a value knife is a knife that you buy that is worth what you paid, and it may actually be worth more than what you paid for it. So I just have some examples out here of some knives that kind of fit into both categories and kind of stand on the line of cheap versus value. And I just want to talk a little bit about them and explain what some of the differences are, or my opinions are on each one. I get that I'm not an expert, and everything is subjective to you and your opinions of what is a good value and what you think is expensive. So anyhow, just running down these knives. This is a knife. It's a Smith & Wesson, and it is a China-made knife. It's called a Smith & Wesson SWAT knife, and I got this at a gun show years ago, and I probably paid about $10-12 for it. It has significant lock rock. The blade wobbles from side to side, and is made of some pretty shitty steel. It says surgical China for the steel, and it has this steel lock bar interface. At the time when I bought it, I was buying a lot of cheaper knives, and just wanted something that could beat on, and I actually had quite a few of those, and come to learn that they're not very good. They're not very quality blades, and I was unhappy with them. You can see it's a chisel ground, but that's what I would call a cheap knife. It may meet somebody's needs. It could meet your purposes. I certainly used a bunch of these to cut things. It's a knife. It's not a bad knife. It's not a good knife, but it is a cheap knife. This next knife is an Opinel, and I believe I paid less than $20 for it. I believe it's the Opinel number 8, if I'm saying that correctly. And sorry, it takes two hands to open. It's a carbon steel blade. It has a lock interface that you kind of twist. And this was a cheap knife, but it's also a value knife. It works pretty well. It slices great. The steel that it's made out of sharpens easy. It retains an edge reasonably well, but I'm very happy with it, and I felt that I got my money's worth with this knife. I don't feel that way about this knife. This next knife is an M-Tech, and it is a rip-off of a cold steel blade. I can't remember the name of the cold steel knife that it's actually copying. Anyhow, it's supposed to be able to wave open, and this says it's just made out of 440 steel, but it's a shit steel. There's the lock interface is not that good, and the quality doesn't even feel right, and you can see the knife when fully open, it isn't straight. I had this delivered to the house for about $8 off of Amazon with Prime shipping, after seeing a review on it saying that it was a decent knife, and I figured, hey, I would just go ahead and order it just to have something to play around with. I like different kinds of knives. I like inspecting them, taking them apart, and so that's why I bought that one. I get that it's not a decent knife, and I didn't think that it would be, but that's a cheap knife that is definitely not worth the money. Moving forward, if I saw somebody selling these for $1 a piece, I wouldn't buy them. Now here is a Rat 1 made by Ontario, and this is a great knife. It's not my favorite knife, but it is a knife that I use a lot. It's a knife that is very strong, robust, has ALS-8 steel, which is not the best steel. A lot of times you'll see people say, oh, CR13 or 8 CR13, I should say, or 5 or 3 CR. They're great steels if they're treated right, and ALS-8. And the reality is they're not good steels. People would want to argue that, but they're adequate steels that meet the cutting needs of most people. And so that doesn't make them bad, but it certainly doesn't make them good steels either. It just means that if you're cutting envelopes open and opening packages and tape and stuff like that all day long, these steels are fine. Or if you're doing cutting, cardboard or rope or carpet or drywall, and you're okay sharpening your knife more often, these steels are fine. But they're not quality steels. They're not decent steels. They're adequate steels. But this knife is $25 shipped to my house. It has a good lockup. It deploys very well. Has a reasonable traction plan on it. Has 4-point carry. This is a great value knife. $25 for a knife that brings all this capability. It's a great deal. Same thing with this Spyderco Resilience. Where are you going to get a blade that size with 4-point carry, G10 handles, solid liner lock for $40? I mean, this is a great, inexpensive knife that also brings a lot of value. So this is a value knife. Cheap knife, value knife. And then this is a FRN Bird Meadowlark. But again, it's got 4-point carry, great traction plan on it. 8CR13 MOV. Again, people have different opinions of what's a good steel and what's not. It's an adequate steel that meets the needs of most cutting tasks for most people. It's certainly not a bad steel, and it has a great lockup. It's a small, lightweight, similar to the Delica profile. It's a great knife. I'm glad I bought it. I paid less than $20 for that delivered to my house. 4-point carry. It's a great value knife. It's certainly worth every penny that I paid. This knife, not worth what I paid. These are cheap knives. I'm going to go ahead and move that so we don't mix them up. These knives were inexpensive knives that are great value, and I'd buy them over and over again. So again, I just want to make a little bit of a video talking about the distinction between a cheap knife versus a value knife. Oh, I did want to talk a little bit about Spyderco Paramilitary too. This is one of the best knives I've ever used. I have 3 of these because I'm so impressed with it. It's a great steel. S30V, good edge retention. It's a tough steel. A great design on this blade. A lot of people say, "Oh, my para had some chipping or some issues with the tip." But you got to remember, it's the blade profile. It's not just the steel that has impact there. This has a great traction plan, has 4-point carry, has a great locking system on it. This is a $100 knife, but I would consider this the best value of almost any knife that I've ever bought, because this knife is so good. It's worth more than $100. It's probably $150, $175 knife range. It's a great knife. It has a great deployment plan, great traction plan. Terrific knife. It's so much better than most knives out on the market. So it's a value knife in my opinion, even though it's over $100. Anyhow, that's it. Just some thoughts.